So know your story, right? Know your broad, like overall career trajectory. Know exactly where you've come from and where you're going. That doesn't have to be like, oh, personally, I used to work catering and in a grocery store and I have tons of customer service experience. Like that's just as much of an important part of my story as anything else that's more recent and more academic. But it's also like, I have a passion for serving people, right? I love to connect with people. I never feel like I have a good day of work unless I can feel like I have connected with one person, right? That's the biggest portion for me. So go with that really broad, like think about your values. What makes you you? What are you bringing to the table? And then go ahead and take that broad and take it to the specific, right? Like because I care so much about people and that connection with people, I'm then able to work the reference desk and help people find what they need. Or, if it was a more access services role, like I'm really passionate about connecting people with resources. Things like connecting people to laptops or helping them understand technology, things like that. Like you can take that broad and depending on how you think about it, tie it really well to the specific. And don't forget about the personal, like why you and what makes you you, right? Like we have this general idea that we have to be very safe in interviews. And I think when you show those unique, quirky parts of yourself, when you share a funny story, that's when people feel like they can really connect with you. So overall, like just about any story, right? You set the scene, you introduce like the characters, the specific skills, and then you tie it into exactly who you are. And obviously, share what you're comfortable. And to be able to do that, the most important thing is that you practice. You're going to practice as much as you can. Rehearse mentally and verbally, right? Talk things through. Have somebody prompt you with their questions and just think about, oh, how would I answer this question? All right. And come up with a couple of different answers and just keep doing that over and over and over and over again. And what you can do is you can take that institutional knowledge, you can take the job ad, and you can take who you are and think about what would the questions be that they would ask me, right? And start just constantly rehearsing that, because the more you rehearse that mentally out loud, and the more you think about these things, the more you're able to show up as yourself, right? You're not going to spend your whole time thinking, okay, did I talk about this one specific skill set? Did I talk about this one, specific example? Did I meet all the needs in this question? You're able to really show up as yourself with all of that rehearsal and that preparation. And to a certain extent, it's less stressful. It's always going to be stressful. And thinking about those job questions, in my experience, right, which isn't huge, but I've interviewed for quite a few jobs, think about you, right? Always they start off with, tell me about yourself. So craft your story. What is your narrative? Mine is, I started out in college. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wanted to help people. So I worked in student affairs and got that degree in legal studies. And I quickly realized that I loved research and connecting with people and working on a college campus. And student affairs wasn't the right thing, but how do I combine helping people in research and working on a college campus? Oh, I want to be an academic librarian. I literally had like a light bulb moment at some point. So I finished my first master's degree, and personally, I actually set aside time to take care of my family, right? I spent years in, as a stay-at-home parent, which I'm comfortable sharing. Not everybody is. And then I, taught yoga, did things like that, did a lot of volunteer work in the community. And then I went back to library school. And ever since I've done X, Y, Z, right? I got this job, I got this internship, I got another job. And all of these things have been leading to this ultimate job, right? So you have this general story, and then you have your talking points. And what you want to do with those talking points is think about the specifics of the job ad, right? Like not everything in your past is necessarily going to hit the specifics. The broad you is what makes you you. But think about how the specifics of you tie to each job description bullet point, right? The more you're able to hit, especially in a phone interview, they're able to like check, yes, they've done this, yes, they've done that. Oh, they explained how this thing that I didn't think was relevant meets that. So make sure you're ready to go. Also, think about why here. Be extremely specific. I know one of the number one things I've seen on the other end of these things, serving on search committees, is that people are slightly offended when you're just like, oh, well, I just need a job and I'd like to live here, or, you know, and that's a ton of labor that we all shouldn't have to do a ton of time, but it makes a huge difference, right? So connect with the people on the search committee, explain why you're the best fit, and then, you know, showcase your knowledge of the institution. Like, I know that this institution just won this super cool grant, or is working on this project or this community outreach, and these are the things that I really care about, and these are the things I want to do. Always make sure you have specifics about programs and anything else. And, you know, think about a story like, oh, I used to work with students at this one thing, and this is how I'm going to tie it into that. Or I led these awesome story times, and I'm really looking forward to doing that here, if that's something that the institution talks about. And that goes directly into the job skills, right? So take time ahead of time, weeks, go over your resume, go over your CV, go over everything you've ever done, and just remind yourself of all the cool stuff you've done. Like, I guarantee everything that you've done up till now is huge and exciting, and it's just so easy to lose sight of all the work that we've done. So think about that, right? Like, have those bullet points in the back of your brain, have those stories. This is a program I'm really proud of. This is a project I worked on in library school. This is something I did in my internship. This is a paper I wrote. Think about how those job skills to not tie to your story. And also think about if this is a, you know, I'm not really sure of the audience, so I didn't want to go too much into, but this is a time to also think about your service philosophy, your teaching philosophy, if those are things that are asked for and required. Really take time to write those things down and think them through, because you will be asked and you don't want to have to come up with that off the cuff. Other questions that almost always come up and are things that are really important to think about, diversity and inclusion. I'm really hesitant to give like tips and tricks when it comes to things like diversity and inclusion, because I think if that's something that you are mindful of in all of your life, it will be easy enough to talk about in the interview. If you are not showing up for other people consistently in your life, you're not going to be able to talk about that authentically. So take some time to really reflect on whether you're doing the work, whether you're showing up before you even get to the interview, because you will be able to answer the questions if you're doing it. Another type of question that's generally asked is, you know, how do you learn new things, or how do you solve problems? And those can be like, usually in my experience, it's one or the other. So come up with stories like, oh, I was really overwhelmed when my supervisor, overwhelmed is probably not a good word. I was really like excited to dig into this new project and nervous because I didn't have the skills, and this is how I executed it, right? Those kinds of things show how flexible you are. The best managers, right? I'm currently also pursuing a graduate certificate in organizational leadership. The best leaders always say things like, you know, hire for attitude, train for skills. So if you're able to talk about how excited you are to do the work, to dig in, and how you think about things, you're more likely to get that connection with good leaders, right? And come up with those great stories about that in whatever setting. Like, it's fine if that's, you know, a completely unrelated job in your mind. I think everything's related, but come up with a great story. And then one of the biggest tips I've ever, interesting points I've ever gotten was conflict, right? Almost everyone will ask, you know, how do you deal with conflict? And they don't want to hear, well, I'll go to my supervisor and blah, blah, blah. Like, everybody knows the administrative steps, right? Think about how in your life you are interacting with your colleagues, your supervisors, and everybody else. Take the time to think about it and really reflect. And it shouldn't be a brush off answer. It shouldn't be, oh, you know, I love everybody. Like, that's not true. People get in arguments all the time. And during one of my most recent interviews, my current job, I actually was lucky enough to get the feedback that, you know, I gave one of the best answers they've ever heard on that one, which was like mind blowing. Made me feel so good. And what I did is I had that story in my mind, right, about conflict. And because I had a story in my mind about a conflict with somebody that I love more than anyone in the world, right? Like one of my favorite all-time coworkers, but we disagreed. So I was like, this is how we handled this conflict. I was able to share how much compassion I have for my colleagues, for the institution, for myself, and how much I care about that person. This is not a time to talk about somebody that you don't like. You need to talk about how you dig in and how you do the work with people that you do care about. And hopefully, you know, most of your current and future coworkers can be people that you care about. And then I actually think the biggest thing with any interaction, right? And I try to think about this when I'm teaching students, when I'm doing a reference interaction, anything along those lines. Detail's important, right? But sometimes you don't have the answer. You can't help them. Even if you're helping a patron or a customer, a student, anything along those lines, you're not going to be able to answer their question, give them what they want. And the same thing happens in a phone interview or an in-person interview, right? Try to connect with those details. You may not be able to tick every box. But the most important thing is how you make people feel. So think about how you're connecting emotionally with people, and make them want to hear more, right? Like that's a little to be continued sign. Make them want to hear more of your story. Make them feel like you're listening when they answer questions, because you are listening. You can't fake that. And that will go a lot further than whether you ticked every box, right? And this, I think this is applicable to all areas of life, whether or not you were able to give them exactly what they wanted, answer all the questions, think about how you're making people feel. Because aside from those worksheets that everybody has during a phone interview, checking all the stuff off, they're like, okay, they have all this experience. There's probably multiple people that have all this experience. They're gonna go with that like gut check, like, I get them. I feel connected with them, or I feel like they were being honest with me. And that's something that's really important to keep in mind. And then also pay attention. You know, what are they sharing with you? They're telling you a story right back. What are all the context clues that you can gather, right? Use that to then do the research, right? Look up everybody that's on that search committee. Look up what their scholarship is. If this is academic, look up what kind of programs they run, if you can get access to that. Their job titles, make sure you have all of their names, because that's really important information that you can then use later, because they're sharing a lot with you. Look at what they emphasize in questions. Are they asking, you know, a lot of questions about like diversity, inclusion, conflict, or are they asking a lot of stuff about specific skills, and it's clear other people in the room don't necessarily care about those things? And along those lines, the pay attention is not just about how can you sell yourself to them, right? Pay attention to how they're selling themselves to you. The library world is hard. And if you're going to move for a job, if you're going to uproot yourself, make sure that this is a place that is safe for you. You know, especially if you have any, you know, like marginalized identities or anything about yourself, like pay attention, because they are telling you a lot with their questions, with the way they respond to you, what they tell you about the institution. And, you know, no job is worth moving away from your friends and your family to be miserable or to be disrespected. And they're telling you a lot through this process. So take care of yourself as much as you can. No job's worth your mental health. And I know that statement itself has a certain level of privilege, but we all need to be alive and we all need to take care of ourselves. So pay attention for the sake of selling yourself future, and also just to hear what they're saying about their institution and their culture and how they talk to each other and how they talk to you and how much you feel like they're listening to you. That was all I had. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at ajennings-roche@ubalt.edu, or I'm on Twitter, ajennings-roche. I'm totally up for questions, comments, concerns, new library friends. You know, I've been in this reference and instruction librarian role just for a few months, although I do have a broad breadth of life experience, and I'm looking forward to getting to know all of you. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Allison. This is Shannon again. I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple questions that came in the chat, if that's okay.